Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to Canterbury Christchurch University and our Verena Holmes building, and to the launch of the Academy for Sustainable Futures. For those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm Ramatra Ramachandran. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University. In common parlance, I'm the head of the University. Particularly want to really welcome all our various constituent parts of the university community, our student community. It's lovely to see so many of our students here, my colleagues, our staff community, governors, and also a number of external guests who are here, who we work with and have worked with on sustainability for many, many years in recent times. So delighted to have you all with us. A special welcome, of course, to Dr. Jane Davidson, formerly a minister in the Welsh Government, and who will be introduced more properly shortly, but delighted that you have come all the way from as far west as you can in Wales to as far east as you can in England. So delighted to have you with us. As many of you know, this year is our Diamond Jubilee. So with small beginnings 60 years ago, today multi-faculty institution with 18,000 students across 3 campuses in Kent, as well as with a number of partner colleges as well. And one of the core commitments of our university and our institution throughout the 60 years has been around social justice. Our values are driven by the values around social justice. And of course, today's topic, sustainability, is very much about part of that social justice agenda. Now, I'm not going to obviously go through our 60-year history in 2 minutes, but what I do want to say is when we produced our current strategic plan covering the period 2015 to 2022, sustainability has been an important cross-cutting theme, and it's something we are very passionately committed to as an institution, and led by our sustainability team, some of whom you will hear from shortly. We have been driving this forward in partnership with others as well, not just our own internal staff and student body, but more widely as well. So it's a huge commitment from the university. And just to say, some of the things we have achieved over the last decade, and I'm just going to give a couple of examples. In the last decade, we have reduced our carbon emissions by 54%. And that's, for those of you in this technical field, Scope 1 and Scope 2, as it's known. So 54% we have reduced our carbon emissions by in the last decade. And through something called the Futures Initiative, which many of you have been part of, we have been promoting sustainability very much within the curriculum. And our work is very much recognized, and the awards we have received are, in a sense, quite a few and numerous to mention. But I just wanted to highlight 2 things. One is the Green Gown Awards. We have had a number of Green Gown Awards to recognize our work in sustainability. And also the Collaborative Award for Teaching Excellence, which we won recently. The sustainability team won recently, and I think we will be going to receive the award sometime, I think in April, somewhere in Bristol from memory. So these are just examples of, I think, the distinctive contribution and the distinctive way in which we have collaboratively taken forward sustainability and external recognition for the work we have done. So why are we now, today, after all this work, launching the Academy for Sustainable Futures? Now, I don't want to steal Nicola's thunder, because she's going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the Academy. But in one line, it is about now mainstreaming what we do right across the institution. It's about embedding what we do right across the institution in terms of education, research, advocacy across our staff and student body, right across all parts of the university, and making a real step change. And that's the purpose, in a sense, of the Academy, and Nicola will say a little bit more about that. So that's, I think, enough from me. We're going to hear some brief descriptions of the commitments of different constituencies within the university before our keynote speaker takes the stage, though there isn't a stage, it's a metaphoric stage. So I'm just going to introduce all my colleagues in one go to save me sitting down and standing up and every few minutes. So firstly, I think we're going to hear from Judith Armott, who's the chair of the university's governing body, and Judith will talk about the governing body's commitment to sustainability and as part of the work we are doing in developing our new strategic framework for 2023 to 2030. We will then move on to Nicola Kemp, who many of you know, who is the educational lead for sustainability within the sustainability team, and she's going to really talk a little bit about the academy and what its purpose is and what it's going to do. And then we will move to Mike Weed, our Senior Pro-Vice Chancellor and the lead in the senior management team for sustainability. And Mike is going to talk a little bit about the climate emergency and the university's strategy for addressing the climate emergency. And we will finish this first section with Dan Bieschner, the president of our Students' Union, who is going to give us the student voice and how students are engaged, because it's all about future generations. So it's really important we are able to hear from Dan. And I think Dan will bring with him other student voices as well. And then the second part, I'm going to invite Peter Ranz, our Director of Sustainability, who's over there, who coordinates this whole thing and has been doing a fabulous job over a number of years here, to properly introduce our keynote speaker, Jane Davidson, and then Peter, I think you will manage some questions and discussion and facilitate that as well. So I hope we all have a productive evening, and I'm delighted that you're all able to be here for the launch of the Academy for Sustainable Futures. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Very good to be here this evening. True change needs leadership from the top, and I'm very conscious of that. As chair of the governing body of Canterbury Christchurch University, I'm delighted to be here, to be at the launch of the university's Academy for Sustainable Futures. This is a personal conviction of mine. I'm really, truly pleased to be here tonight. The governing body has, as Rama said a moment ago, already started to consider its next strategy. This will be our strategy for 2023 to 2030. And as we started to think about it last September, we resolved to put sustainability and the need to move to net zero centre stage. It's therefore a real pleasure to see the university form this academy as one part of the path forward to a more sustainable future for all of us. In the last 3 years, we've seen crisis mount upon crisis. The question of Brexit or not, succeeded by a global pandemic, only to be supplanted by war on the very edge of Europe. And yet, all of these issues are, incredibly, less serious than the challenge of climate change and how to provide a sustainable world. Without change on a global scale, large parts of this world will become uninhabitable in time. So we know we all have to make a step change in our behaviour and our life choices if we're to adapt and survive. Universities have so much to offer in developing the way forward, by role modelling the best approach and by influencing others through teaching and research. How pleased I was to hear Rama use that word, embedding, because that's what will be required. Well, this academy will foster Canterbury Christchurch's response to these needs. I wish all of you involved in the academy every good wish and success for the future. Thank you.
The Academy for Sustainable Futures is deeply rooted. It's rooted in time, and it's rooted in this place. A seed sown many years ago. It's been slowly germinating and maturing out of sight whilst the world went into lockdown. Today is a day of emergence. The seed has become a sturdy seedling. Today is significant. The 15th of March, the Ides of March in the Roman calendar. It's a day to beware. But it's also a day historically associated with hope and celebration, as it signified the new year. These paradoxical, cautionary, and hopeful associations are appropriate for the launch of the Academy. The urgency and extent of the contemporary global crisis requires us to be aware. But the Academy is rooted in hopefulness, that through advocacy and action, this university can contribute to a more sustainable future. The priorities of the Academy reflect our identity as a university with an orientation towards the common good. We see sustainability research and knowledge production as critical to the Academy and its role in facilitating evidence-based advocacy. The opportunity to be involved in and informed about sustainability research is also essential if we are to educate our students for the future. We want our university to exemplify and role model sustainable practices. And we will build relationships for change through engagement with our communities locally, nationally, and internationally. Going back to its roots, the Academy is founded on our well-established and distinctive approach to sustainability leadership. The dimension I want to emphasise here today is the significance of authentic, collaborative partnerships. Collaboration has become a word so familiar, we rarely question it. Its Latin roots, col and laborare, literally to labour together, are helpful here, as they remind us of the hard labour and work involved. And realising the purpose and priorities of the Academy will involve a lot of hard work. So I am delighted to be joined by so many collaborators this evening. I want to particularly acknowledge the support of our Students' Union and also want to welcome and thank our external advisors to the Academy, Professor Carolyn Hale from Cardiff Metropolitan University and Associate Professor Paul Warwick from the University of Plymouth. This collaborative approach has informed our institutional response to the climate emergency, and I'm now going to pass to Professor Mike Weed to tell you a bit more about that. Thank you.
Universities are not normal. This university isn't normal. We're unlike any other type of organisation responding to the climate crisis. Our responsibilities and our potential mean that our response to the climate emergency must go way beyond that of most other organisations that are concerned only with their own role as producers and consumers of carbon. Our response to the climate emergency, our climate emergency strategy, was approved by our governing body in November, and the approach we are taking is underpinned by the expertise and insight of our Academy for Sustainable Futures that we're here to launch today. Our response represents our ambition to maximise our contribution to tackling the climate emergency, drawing on our responsibilities as a values-led Church of England foundation and our potential as an educator, as a knowledge producer and broker, as an anchor institution in our region. We've committed to this in words by signing the Global Climate Emergency Letter, committing to achieving net zero by 2050 at the latest, but in deeds by already reducing our direct emissions by more than half in the last decade, as the Vice-Chancellor said, which ranks us 13th for low direct emissions among the UK's 102 large multi-faculty universities. But now we wish to look significantly beyond our own emissions to explore how we can maximise our impact. Our first decision is that we will not offset the blue circle in this diagram. That is, we will not take the easy option of paying others, often in less developed and more vulnerable parts of the world, to deal with a problem we are responsible for, and we, as a society at least, have created. However, our direct emissions, the red circle in this diagram, comprise less than 20% of the emissions in our value chain. The remaining 80% relates to the actions of others stimulated by university operations. This includes, for example, the commuting of our students and staff, and most significantly, our procurement. By insetting these activities, the bottom left yellow circle, we will take responsibility for our full value chain and develop processes, policies, and approaches to reduce these emissions as part of our journey to net zero. However, by far, our greatest potential to tackle the climate emergency is through the influence of our education, our research, and our advocacy in providing the skills, knowledge, and evidence for the local, regional, national, and international economy and community to reduce emissions. This is the top right yellow circle. That's not to say we'll divert focus from our direct emissions, not least because we need to be able to model behaviours. As others have said, we need to say not do as we say, but rather do as we do. Nevertheless, to illustrate potential, if we were to reduce our direct emissions, which now total only 4,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, this would only have an effect equal to every car in the UK reducing its annual mileage by only half a mile. Conversely, if we were able to deploy our influence through our graduates, 3,000 of whom find employment in the regional economy every year, and through our research and our advocacy, to support just 8 in every 1,000 micro businesses in Kent, that's those employing less than 10 people, to do as we do and switch to a renewable energy tariff, that would have the same impact as reducing our direct emissions to zero. And if we were able to increase that influence, to persuade just 5% of those micro businesses in Kent to make that switch, this would be the equivalent to eradicating carbon throughout our entire value chain. Our response to the climate emergency, therefore, is an ambitious undertaking that seeks to leverage our unique potential as a values-led, regionally anchored knowledge producer, broker, and educator. This is what's necessary to maximise our impact on the climate emergency. We will not, parochially and puritanically, focus on only the impact of our direct emissions. We will embrace our wider responsibilities and potential to focus our effort on where our impact will be greatest. To do this, we will most immediately focus on 3 areas. First, we will thoroughly examine how carbon is produced in our value chain, particularly through procurement and commuting, and set targets for reduction that will challenge both the university and our wider community, stakeholders and suppliers. Second, we will continue to reduce our own direct emissions, focusing particularly on our buildings and facilities. Third, and most important, as we build our next university strategic framework, we will ensure that we, 1, develop the climate advocates of the future through embedding sustainability education in our curriculum, and 2, develop evidence for climate policy and practice that can support the type of longitudinal systems change at scale necessary to effect societal behavioural and attitudinal change. We've already halved our direct emissions. We're in the leading group of large multi-faculty universities for low direct emissions. But it's not enough. Our response to the climate emergency now sets our sights higher and wider. Our ambition is to significantly exceed the target that was set by our commitment in the Climate Accord letter to reach net zero by 2050. We wish to both exceed net zero by having an impact that far exceeds our own emissions, and to do so far earlier than 2050. This is our formative pledge to future generations of the university's students, staff, and stakeholders. This formative future generations pledge will be extended and refined as we develop the university's new strategic framework in this, our Diamond Jubilee year. So as we celebrate our 60th university, our pledge to future generations will come to form part of our commitment to 2030, to 2050, and for our next 60 years and beyond.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I'm Dan. I'm the Students' Union President. And before I say some words on behalf of the Students' Union, I'd like to share with you some student voices. On the undergraduate education courses, we have modules on sustainability, education and action for hope, social justice and the pedagogy of freedom, sustainability and the global village, and international education in a post-colonial world. We spoke to some students from these modules about sustainability, education, and hope for the future. Here are some of their thoughts.
Hi, my name's Lucas Worthing.
I'm Laurie.
My name is Aaron Britnell.
My name is Eva.
I'm Max.
Ruth Shepherdson.
My name is Iva.
My name's Evelyn.
My name is Anissa Chowdhury.
Hi, I'm Mary and I do Education Studies.
The subject of sustainability is incredibly distressing, yet one that is becoming increasingly prominent in our society every day. We all need to be more aware of it.
I didn't know the importance of sustainability when I was growing up. However, through Education Studies modules, it's clear that schooling is not prioritising such important matters. I've definitely become more aware of the lack of political will in controlling discourses that prevent change in our society. I still don't fully believe that my power as an individual to make change is significant enough, but I've decided to make changes that are small and be more aware.
It goes without saying that climate change is one of the most important issues facing us today. The environment as we know it is changing. Society needs to shift their focus on sustainability now more than ever before. And where do we start? We start by educating the next generation.
Learning about sustainability is needed within education. While it is a daunting, sad and worrying subject, it is needed to foster change throughout the university and society as a whole. This is because it's not spoken enough about, even in this university. Every course should strive to educate sustainably in the context of their sectors.
Using films as well as lectures to lead discussions on climate change, planetary boundaries and tipping points has been an interesting and eye-opening experience. Just this morning, a newspaper article mentioned the ocean's tipping point, and I knew what they meant.
Climate change and sustainability are huge topics that are talked about the least. These are issues that have become an emergency and need to be reinforced in every aspect of life, especially in education.
I think it is great that people are starting to learn more about sustainability and how it affects everyday life, but I feel like it should have been brought into the education system a long time ago. I mean, how many more COP meetings are we going to need before a resolve is discovered? It's scary to think how much we know, but how little we are doing as a global community to change it.
This module has helped me realise the scale of these issues. I was already aware that the way we live is not sustainable. By watching the movies, I saw how big landfills are, how huge the mining equipment is, and how many resources we use. I believe that seeing the problem and realising the scale of it is the first step towards a solution.
When I first started these modules, I knew that this was a significant problem facing the world today. However, now these modules have made me realise just how hopeless it is if we don't act now.
As an international student, I have found it so important to get involved with the university community and Students' Union in multiple ways, which has allowed me to grow on a holistic level and create a home away from home. Each experience on its own and as a collective have allowed me to develop my learning, awareness, and advocacy in the fields of social justice, education, inclusion, and sustainability. Through my involvement with the Us in the World program, I have really recognized that we all have a significant role to play in our world, but that we are surrounded by barriers. This has led me to creating a project whereby the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are being developed in a way that is more inclusive and accessible to more people through using alternative and augmentative communication. For change to happen in our world, don't we all need to understand our role in our world and how we can all make a difference?
Learning about sustainability while being extremely important is also extremely depressing. I had an idea of the state of the planet before this module, but the module has really opened my eyes to the issues. The film Seaspiracy was particularly shocking to me, and I definitely recommend that you watch it.
As a committee member of the Students for Activism Society here at Canterbury Christchurch, I feel the need to spread the message about sustainability and sustainable learning. Sustainability is no longer just reuse, reduce and recycle. It's about inequalities that cause social and climate issues. It's not about what just you as an individual can do anymore. It's about making the men with the briefcases bring permanent change that's desperately needed.
Within the Students for Activism Society, I have gained a multitude of skills whereby I'm continuously growing and aiming to develop a stronger sense of identity, both as an individual pursuing activism change on a smaller scale or within my collective charity identity. I have learned that I'm capable of making a change and using my voice to make a difference.
So I was asked tonight to speak this evening to say something about climate change and partnership. I could start by telling you that our Students' Union has been awarded Excellent in the National Union of Students Green Impact Award 3 years in a row. I could tell you that we were awarded Best Non-Commercial Union in the country for our work in this area. I could tell you that we run our own food composter right here on campus. And I could tell you that in partnership with the university, we've been accredited in the National Union of Students Responsible Futures Initiative. I could also tell you that for 3 years in a row, we were in the top 3 universities in the country whose staff committed to teaching about the climate crisis and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I could tell you all of that, but in fact, none of it matters. No awards or achievements matter until we understand the fundamental flaw in our approach to climate change. Because the truth is, we're not destroying the planet. Planet Earth will be perfectly fine once humanity is extinct. In fact, the Earth will flourish without us. Ecosystems will stabilise, global temperatures, sea levels will return to a habitable equilibrium, and life on Earth will thrive and grow. So the truth is, the climate crisis is not that we're killing the planet, but we're killing human beings. It is those in the world who are least responsible for climate change who will be the first victims of it. Those who live off the land and have very little carbon impact will in fact be the first to suffer. Responding to the climate emergency is not just about reducing, reusing, recycling. It's also about the understanding that we're a global community. And it's our responsibility to protect those who are most at risk and most vulnerable. Until those of us privileged enough with access to education, a roof over our heads, and the ability to turn on the heating whenever we like, realise our moral and social responsibility to protect those less fortunate, will truly be missing the real crisis. We as a student movement hope that the Academy for Sustainable Futures will use its powers as educators to ensure that Christchurch graduates leave this campus armed with the knowledge, power and confidence to tackle the climate crisis head on, not just to save the planet, but to save humanity. And before I go, I should just tell you that as a result of our student elections last week, we've pledged to plant 1,000 trees, 1 tree for every student who voted. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dan, Judith, Mike, and Rama. My name is Peter Ranz. I'm Director of Sustainability Development, and I lead the Academy. I don't normally stand at the front. I tend to encourage others to do so. So it is now my great pleasure to welcome Jane Davidson to give this evening's keynote lecture. Jane is Pro-Vice Chancellor Emeritus at the University of Trinity St David's. Prior to that, from 2000 to 2011, Jane was Minister for Education and then Minister for Environment and Sustainability in the Welsh Government, where she proposed legislation to make sustainability a central organising principle. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act came into law in 2015. In 2020, Jane published the book #FutureGen, Lessons from a Small Country, which is the story of why Wales was the first country in the world to introduce legislation to protect future generations, and I believe still the only country to do so. Jane.
Well, I actually want to start with a massive congratulation to this university. I do a lot of public speaking, and I go to a lot of places where they tell me they're doing things, but they can't necessarily back it up. And what I've just heard from a whole range of people in this university is a very, very real commitment to making change. So I'm delighted to have been asked to speak at the launch of this academy. And normally I spend my life talking about Future Gen, lessons from a small country. 3 events a week since I launched it in 2020, all over the world. Talked in 34 countries to date. There are 8 countries currently looking at legislation, following on from the legislation in Wales. And next year, the UN is asking every country in the world that is a member of the United Nations, 197 of them, to demonstrate what they're doing for future generations. So never believe, as Margaret Mead says, that a small group of people can't change the world. They're the only ones who can. So I really hope that I'm talking to a small group of people here who are going to absolutely transform the world in terms of this university. And I think I am, because when we talked about what we were going to call this talk, can you all see it? Do you care enough to act? Here and now. So this isn't just a conversation about whether or not we should act, what is the evidence behind us acting. This is a conversation about, are you prepared collectively and individually to either change because you haven't yet started on the path of doing rather than talking, or if you've already started that path, to share what you're doing and why it is really important that we all are on a path to change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Wales and the legislation, just because if I've been asked to come here and talk about it, you better have a couple of slides about actually what it is and what it does. But I also am particularly interested, having spent 10 years after government leading a sustainability institute that we called Inspire in the University of Wales, Trinity St David, which in many ways, Rama, isn't it? It's quite similar, because we come from a similar church tradition. Right at the heart is Trinity, which was a teacher education college. Actually, it started educating the monks that were the teachers in Lampeter, which is another part of our institution. We then went into partnership with a modern university, Swansea Metropolitan. We then took over the University of Wales. So we are 4 universities and 2 colleges. And therefore, what we offer is dual sector learning. So all the way through from literally 14 years old for the rest of people's lives. And a whole range of opportunities all the way in university jargon from level 2 to level 8. So it's a very different kind of model, but you are a very different kind of model. You do different things here and in Medway, and I'm really delighted to see lots of students, and I hope some of those voices that we saw on the Student Voices video, Dan, are here in this room tonight as well. Just some of just the things we do actually have to remember in terms of what we're doing. Do you know about country overshoot days? Few of you do? Anyway, I think it's a really simple way of saying what the problem is. Because we talk about climate a lot, but it somehow feels over there. We talk about ecological problems a lot, and they might feel even further away, because you have to be as old as me to remember what kind of creatures were around pre-1970 and to realise just how much we've lost. But for my kids, they grew up with fewer animals than I did. So in a sense, what happens is you don't remember because you didn't have the experience. But what we've got here, I just think is absolutely terrifying. this is, in terms of country overshoot days, it's basically looking at the Earth's capacity to regenerate itself. All right? And every year, what you would want, and in 1970 happened, is that at the end of 1970, countries could regenerate themselves. They would not have overused their resources. What we have now is this chart that you see in front of you. Now, I don't know whether anybody has found the UK yet. It's not in a good place, is it? If you look at that side of the chart, you will see the villains. All the developed world is over on that side. And they are the people who are using the emissions, who are creating the problems, and who are ensuring that the Earth does not have the capacity to regenerate itself. And from what Dan was saying about the planet will be fine without us. But we need to try and make sure that we as humans adapt sufficiently to make sure the planet is fine with us. And at the other end, or the other side of this chart, what you see is those countries are those countries which do not contribute towards the emissions, but are most likely to receive most of the problems. And we're already seeing that on a grand scale. So I think ecological footprint, what our effect is, how many planets we use in our daily lives, is quite a useful way of us thinking about whether or not we individually and collectively are taking decisions that are good or bad for both our and future generations' further existence. And I was very privileged about 15 years ago to meet one of the most formidable campaigners for trees that has ever existed on this planet of ours, awarded the Nobel Prize, just seen as an incredibly doughty campaigner. Wangari Maathai, Kenyan woman, is absolutely clear that if you, in the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground. And this is a moral debate, a values debate, a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other, and that time is now. Now, the first time I heard her say that was actually back in 2009, and she argued then that the time should have been 1970, but the second best time is now. And that was in 2009. And here we are in a situation where there has been so many words spoken, but so little action taken that we continue to create the problem. So what I want to look at initially is what are the ways in which we can rethink the values that we have, or play to the values that an institution like this has right at the core of its being. And that's effectively what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act did in Wales. You heard Peter say that when I was minister, I tried very hard to get the Welsh Government to put sustainability as the central organising principle, not A. There's lots of A principle, which don't get then carried out, but the central organising principle of what we did. And I got total agreement. And we were in coalition at the time, so it was two parties in government, total agreement that we should have sustainability as the central organising principle of government. But the civil servants said, hang on, there's no legislation to make us do that. We don't understand what you mean. And it's that sort of journey when you're trying to get people to understand the need for change, you have to define the change needed, that actually starts a real conversation about what do you have to have in place to make it happen. And so we moved in Wales from a duty to promote sustainable development, which in fact I could meet now by just doing what I'm doing now. Nobody in this room needs to change any aspect of their lives, but I could deliver on the duty to promote immediately. So we must have a duty to deliver. And as this academy grows, all of you here who are here at the launch, you need to demand that the academy has a duty to deliver. And in Wales now, the legislation is about a duty to deliver. So all organisations have to deliver on 7 goals which are linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. And as Peter said at the outset, it has meant, and I didn't know this was going to happen, it has meant that Wales is still, at this point, the only country in the world that has a legal mechanism to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, there are lots of other countries doing some amazing things, but actually to enshrine in law a legal mechanism, and Wales isn't a member state. So you don't have to be a member state, you don't have to be a government to make a commitment that you drive through. And hearing what Judith was saying and wearing the goals on the lapel of her jacket as well with the governing body support is absolutely critical to this academy's success here. So the Act has the 7 goals, and also, and this is great because we didn't exchange views about this before we came, but what Nicola was talking about in collaboration, these areas on the left here are the 5 mandatory ways of working. Every public organisation answerable to the Welsh Government has to demonstrate to an independent commissioner, to the government, and if necessary the court, that they are thinking long term, that they are thinking preventatively, that they are collaborating between organisations, they're integrating outcomes, and they're involving people about whom decisions are being made. Now that in itself leads to completely different outcomes in terms of any proposals that might be made. This is not a top-down approach, but what it is creates an ability for anybody to effectively go to the Vice-Chancellor and say, this is what you say the university is doing, and we want it to do it. And we have some ideas for how that can happen. And the goals themselves are on the face of the law. Now, we're going to make these available, these slides available to everybody who's come here. So I'm not going to read the goals, and you might struggle from this very nice lecture room with the very small writing. But just to give you some principles, we don't talk about economy, it's redefined as prosperity. The word growth is not there. GDP is not there. This is about creating the right environment that is able to deliver for environment, society, economy, and culture. They're the 4 principles that underpin. So this is not an environmental agenda, because if you negatively use the environment, it has major societal impacts. And if you don't factor the culture of organisations or countries into account, then you don't actually win a debate internally. So now prosperity is innovative and low carbon and supports lifelong education and the opportunity for decent work. Now, every single one of those words can be tested in law. And so they become a very different outcome in terms of where you want to go. And in resilience, it's not just maintaining, but enhancing a biodiverse natural environment. Health is not about how many ambulances come and when, it's how do you maximise people's physical and mental well-being and which choices and behaviours that benefit future health are understood. So it's all looking upstream instead of downstream. This is a move away from incrementalism in doing things and saying this has to be about wholesale change to the way that we've operated. Equality, same principle. How do you ensure that people can fulfil their potential, including their socio-economic background and circumstances, and what potential that universities such as this and my own are able to support. And a point that I think Mike made very, very strongly is that Wales can't offset its emissions in this legislation either, because a globally responsible Wales, when it does anything to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales, takes account of whether that makes a positive contribution. So in law, that could be tackled if people were making a negative contribution. So having this on the face of the Act is driving very different kinds of behaviour. So let's think about just applying those kind of principles in terms of a university. Now, I don't know your university well enough in terms of asking these questions at a detail level, but I hope you'll bear with me at asking them at a general level. Because these are generally, when we're thinking about what does this academy look like for you individually? What does it mean for the way the university pays travel expenses? How do you stop people flying? How do you make sure that people can work remotely? All those sorts of issues become really important. How do you reward good behaviour in what you do and outlaw bad behaviour, and certainly not pay for it? When I first went to my university back in 2011, if you had a higher, if you had a car of 2 litres or up, you were paid more expenses. And it took me about 8 years to get rid of that. So we know that these things are quite difficult because they're institutionalised, and then they're institutionalised as rights. So how do you change behaviour when the very rights that we have, particularly through employment, are leading us in the wrong direction? So I just want to sort of think about these questions. And for me, what a university is for is self-actualisation. How can we be the best that we can be? And what are the circumstances that give us the underpinning to enable that? And now, for government perspective, we know that unless people's physiological and safety needs are met, then actually people do not find it easy to actually take on other responsibilities or opportunities. We know also that issues around love and belonging and esteem are absolutely critical in people feeling safe in terms of moving forward towards self-actualisation. But from a university perspective, it must be about self-actualisation. How can we be the best we can be within the moral values, the circumstances, everything that influences what we do, and how can we influence that as well? What we did in UWTSD, and Professor Carolyn Hales, who's an external examiner, I think, for you. Carolyn, just wave a hand, please. Carolyn was my academic lead in University of Wales Trinity St David. So a number of things that I'm going to talk about, Carolyn was intimately involved in creating. But what we did at Trinity is we also did the kind of sort of people and planet stuff and the green gown stuff. And then I realised that we were winning awards, but we weren't changing the core of our institution. So I went on a sort of mission to try and embed, and I'm really impressed with the modules that you've got here. And we went on a mission to try and embed learning around sustainability in every student's experience. And we actually won the kind of like ability to propose a sort of 15 credit module that every student would do. But somehow it just became incredibly hard to get every faculty to take it up because they were doing other things. And then Carolyn did some amazing work in developing a certificate around the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act so that people understood that sustainability was not just environmental, it is about society and the economy and culture as well as the environment. So it is absolutely about the values of an institution. And we take credit for now leaving the institution. And what it's doing now is it is in the levels 4, 5 and 6, your 3 undergraduate years in the university, we now have a 40 credit module, a common module for all students in the university, which includes sustainability as a core feature of that in all those years, in 4, 5 and 6. So our students in Malaysia, we're on 17 sites, in Malaysia, in London, in Birmingham, as well as all the Welsh sites, irrespective of college or university, can take these common modules. And we are able to do that because we experimented with block teaching in 2019. And then along came COVID. And that block teaching became the most useful thing in translating what the university was doing into the COVID experience. So something that initially met opposition because it was new, then became a fantastic tool in terms of actually maintaining the learning and building potentially on it. So we now can say that the embedding of sustainable development, that when we were trying to do it piecemeal, was really, really hard. And I commend Peter and all the team who I know have worked at this. We first met 15 years ago, something like that. Have worked really, really hard at these things. But now we can say that it is embedded and the governors love it. And the students love it. And we've now had 3 of student presidents in Wales have come from UWTSD, and they have been Inspire interns. And they've taken that sustainability message out into future student movements as well. But I think the other side of this is the measuring what matters. I mean, really important what Mike was saying about the scope 1 and 2 emissions and the scope 3. And we can't separate the scope 3, the value chain emissions, because after all, you may be in a situation where by virtue of having a new building, your emissions are particularly low, but if you're still paying people in terms of flying all over the world, or particularly short flights, then actually you're contributing towards the problem. So I've put up here some calculations, footprint calculations on the 4 areas which are most important in bringing down these emissions. Because not everybody realises that energy, transport, buildings and food are the greatest contributors. So you can immediately ask questions about, well, what is the energy source? And can that be changed? And I think you have a lot of gas here, so cross fingers for you on that one. But, what is the transport? Does the university have transport arrangements which it could change in terms of creating different kinds of emissions? How are the buildings issues being addressed? And what about the food for sale in the university? Whatever, you do some great stuff. I was hearing through the student work and what you do on campus, but are there other issues around food? What we've done in the context of our university is actually partnered with all the public services in one of the counties where we are transforming food procurement for all the bodies, for police, for health, for fire, for the colleges, for the universities, for the nature representatives, all procuring together on a project which is both creating new jobs and employment opportunities in regenerative agriculture and supporting all those organisations as well. So this is a kind of individual focus, but also, and this is developed in Wales to respond to the Wales agenda. B Corp is probably the equivalent, but very expensive otherwise, is to have a one planet standard which looks at both the ecological and the carbon footprint. This was launched at COP, so this was a very deliberate response in the context of that, and you can go through bronze, silver and gold. It's available to any organisation, and it's about working with organisations but being independently assessed. So it moves out of the idea that you have different metrics for different kinds of organisations. It's about all organisations being able to use some similar metrics because you set the pathway you want to do appropriate to you with the assessors. And I don't know whether anybody saw this last week, but there's a new proposition from takethejump.org, which is asking people to sign up to take the following 6 shifts for 1, 3 or 6 months. And they're all the things that contribute most. These are focused very much at an individual level, but it's about understanding the impact that we make. I mean, my sister, highly intelligent, works in PR, very well paid, does a lot of work all over the world. She thinks that my lifestyle can offset her emissions. It doesn't work like that. You have to take responsibility for your own. So these are just the, what is it? If you eat more of a plant-based diet, for example, or if you're very confident about where the meat you eat comes from. If you keep things for a really long time, can you survive without a motor vehicle, for example? Or if you can't, what do you have? Can you share one? All those sorts of issues. How many items of clothing do you buy a year? I think you'll find that actually there are a lot of people who buy a lot, even if they don't wear them. So how can we make sure that we're not contributing, because fast fashion is one of the biggest contributors to the problem. Take no more than 1 short-haul flight every 3 years and 1 long-haul flight every 8 years. I do no short-haul flights. I'm working with the Portuguese government next week. This is either 7 trains or 3 trains and a coach. But I don't do short-haul flights, and France has banned them. If there's anywhere within 3 hours of your destination in France, you cannot go by plane, because that is what the government is doing about emissions, and they're totally changing the agriculture approach. So these are the kind of things about what are the nudges that you can change. How many people have changed their bank? There only are 1 or 2 ethical banks. The most ethical is Triodos. Every single person in this room could use Triodos, for example. And that means that nothing that Triodos funds is causing any contribution towards the problem. You could move to one of the very few green energy companies, and there only are now 4 in the UK that are really green, in the sense that they actually both generate and distribute. Can you, it's often expensive, can you insulate your home? Can you take down your thermostat by a degree? And for those who can make these kind of choices, what about pensions? What about your investments? Where are they sitting? Because there's a lot of pension investments in the UK that are actually funding oil and gas. 80% of the pension funds in the UK fund fossil fuels. So you need campaigns to disinvest in that context. And for me, this is me, on the west of Wales. But I used to live in the centre of Cardiff, in a house where we were guzzling gas, all those things. And in 2007, when I got given the climate job, I thought, right, I'm going to have to live by this job, because I really believe that we have to act. And so every year as a family, we decided to do 1 big green thing a year. And that now has led us to, we grow most of our own stuff, we live a carbon neutral life pretty well, and there's a lot of cider in our lives, but that's okay, because it comes from the trees outside the front door. But there is something about living your passion authentically, because that gives you the courage to stand up to other people who want to carry on with business as usual. And I think that also probably my biggest influence is a woman called Professor Donella Meadows. Now she's a feminist, systems thinker, and she wrote the first major book called Limits to Growth back in 1972, which was the very, very first Earth Summit. And I can see a few people nodding around the room. And then 30 years later, she wrote Limits to Growth, the 30-year update. And what she said in the second book was that in the first book, she thought evidence alone was enough. She thought, and I thought so too when I was a minister, I thought evidence alone was enough. That if you opened people's eyes to the evidence And you're obviously really doing well on that here, looking at those voices who say, I didn't know anything about sustainability and now I really want to act. But evidence alone is not enough because of all those other cultural pressures on us. And so what Donella said is that, you've got to you have the visioning. That's where you are in this process at the moment. You've got the visioning. Now that needs to be networked right across everything, any aspect of this university does, wherever that is. Then there has to be the truth telling. What is really happening? What is really being done? Then there is the learning. And only after the learning can you move to this phrase, loving. And loving is a concept about actually being in a space where you are doing the best you can for yourself and for others. And what she says in this is that if you behave as though the world has no limits, then the answer is collapse, because everybody extracts everything they can. If you behave as though the limits are real, but there's not enough time, the answer is also collapse. That's where we are now. Some of you will probably know that there's going to be a ban on peat from 2024. They've never dug so much peat up in Ireland in the history of peat, because of course what people are doing is they're digging much more up and they're storing it, so that for all those people who can't be weaned off peat, there'll still be a store. So that model does not work. But if the limits are real and close, but there is no time to waste, and there's just enough energy, enough material, enough money, enough environmental resilience, and enough human virtue to bring about a planned reduction in the ecological footprint of humankind, a sustainability revolution to a much better world for the vast majority. Now, when I showed you that chart on the global footprint at the beginning, Britain, July the 29th, okay? During the year of COVID, we went back to August the 21st. So in 2020, we actually gained a month back because of our change of behaviour as a world. Now, we're all very worried about what 2022 is going to look like from 23 and onwards. But the point is that actually short, sharp shocks can deliver real opportunities that we may not have considered yet. And when we start tackling the causes of the problem, living in a different kind of way, I mean, you get people who want to live off-grid in mud huts, and I can take you to some of those in Wales, and very happy they are too, and they have a home for £5,000, and they're growing all their own food alongside it. But actually, most of us want to live in houses that look like regular houses, and many of us would love to live in cities that actually demonstrated sustainability. So that's Hockington, just outside Nottingham, and that's Freiburg, which is not only a model of a sustainable city, but what's really interesting is despite changing politics 5 times since the 1970s, the citizens want it to carry on being a very sustainable city. And if you look at what's happening in Paris at the moment, they're taking cars out of the city centre, they're putting more beaches on the Seine, they're putting many more opportunities for walking and cycling and much more public transport. So these things can be done in the most extraordinary places. So when I wrote my book, I asked a lot of people what they felt the key learnings were from the Welsh government having decided to go down this route, and what needed to happen next. Now, I'll just give you some very quick examples. National Forest that's going to grow from south to North Wales organically is one of the big projects. You may have heard, because the Telegraph hates Wales at the moment, because we are about to pilot a basic income for care leavers at the age of 18. And it's going to be a 2-year pilot for some of the most disadvantaged people, literally in the world. Smacking is outlawed completely from the 21st of March this year. There is a roads review, and every road that cannot demonstrate it can deliver positive outcomes environmentally is being cancelled. The one that became very famous is when the First Minister cancelled changing the M4, which is the only motorway in Wales. So there's a massive increase in funding to sustainable housing. You're talking about emission reduction by 2050. In Wales, all public services have to be net zero by 2030. And that's a challenge to the universities as well. So it's not just talk. What's happening now with an act that delivers is you can also see an action behind it. But I think that these learnings are key. One is about leadership. Now, we've seen leadership today, and it's fantastic leadership. And that means that you're in a wonderful space in terms of actually being able to take this university, already really influential on the sustainability agenda, and actually really lift to major delivery on major elements that contribute towards future for future generations. But there is something about what are the right support and financial mechanisms. Because in terms of just how you're going to use the sun, where you're going to get your energy from, where are we all going to get energy from, particularly in light of this appalling invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it has suddenly become very real for all of us that our hanging on to fossil fuels has been the worst short-term decision that organisations have made. Learning for others is really important. Nature has rights too, and those rights cannot be forgotten because nature, ecology underpins everything we do. And there's a great quote from a man called Satish Kumar who set up Schumacher College, which is a college focused on sustainability in Devon. And Satish tells the story that oikos is the Greek word for home, and ecology, oikos is the eco at the front of ecology, is the knowledge of the planet home. And oikos, economy, is the management of the planet home. So how could humans be so stupid as to manage the planet home without the knowledge of it? So we've ditched ecology, but when we think economy can survive without understanding that we have to get our relationship with ecology right. And the final point here is how in Wales, I want the Act to become a People's Act. I mean, I talked about, basically sort of saying to a Vice-Chancellor or a man with a briefcase, I think, it was described, look, if you believe in this, then we should do X. And I want people in Wales to be able to do that. And what we're now seeing is people in Wales starting to do that. And one of the most exciting projects for me is an old coal community in the South Wales valleys that's about to take control of all its landscape and have it granted to it in perpetuity, provided what they deliver in terms of an economy fits with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's really, really exciting from the country that funded the Industrial Revolution and where the first £1 million cheque was signed. And I said at the beginning that there are lots of other countries that are really, really interested. And just following on Dan's theme about the fact that the planet will be fine, but if we want an existence beyond the existence that we have now, I think there's two things that we need to think about. The first one is, all of you think about the oldest person you know and love, and the youngest person you know and love. Now, in my case, the oldest is my mum. She's in her mid-90s. And my youngest is my grandson, who is 1. Between them lies some 200 years of potential life in terms of my mother's lifetime and my grandson's lifetime. That, in Welsh terms, would be 8 generations, because we think of a generation of around about 25 years is where we work on it. I found it extraordinary to see the other day about the difference between 1918 and 1970 is the same difference as between 1970, and I was at school in 1970, by the way. I was not around in 1918, for the cognoscenti among you. But it's the same difference as between 1970 and 2022. So I was at school in 1970, so I can remember 1970, which is the first, 1972 was the first Earth Summit. But there are a lot of people in this room who will have no knowledge because 1970 is ancient history. And yet here we are with a war. My mother actually said to me last night, she said, I think my life started with a war and it might end with a war. But it has taken all that time. It's taken nearly such a long, between 1918 and 2022 is 100 odd years. So we're in this awful situation at the moment whereby short-term outcomes could actually drive our long-term futures. So just if you hold in mind that person that you love most, young and old, it really helps when you take decisions. And particularly if you put a picture of them on your desk and make yourself look at it just before you take a decision about what to fund those people who are effectively the people with briefcases. So I'm just going to finish with, I'm not good at telling jokes, but I like this one. So 2 planets talking to each other, and one is scratching all over because it's finding it really difficult to actually sit still, and is asking the second planet, what do you think it is? And the second planet said, don't worry, that's humans fleeing for their lives. But don't worry, because it won't last long. Thank you very much. Absolutely critical. I mean, I'm a teacher by profession, and I spent 7 years as the education minister in Wales. And I introduced a new method of activity and play-based learning around areas of learning for 3 to 7-year-olds. And I'm delighted to tell you that this year, the whole of the statutory curriculum in Wales is moving to that. It's also looking at changing term times as well. So primary and secondary education is critical, but a lot of people come to university without any of these issues being necessarily addressed in school at all. And that's why it's so important that the voice of young people through things like Teach the Future is heard. But I think it takes about 15 years to change an education system. So I think that the clamours for that change need to get a lot louder. But we can have a look at how effective or otherwise the Welsh model is. Now it's moved away from subjects to areas of learning, because those areas of learning are much broader in terms of the way in which things can be taken forward. Hugely important. Thank you. My vision for the future is really that quote by Donella Meadows, which is that we wake up enough. And going back to the very thing that we asked at the beginning of the lecture was, do you care enough to act? My vision of the future is that people do care enough to act. And one of the things that I often ask people to do is, just as we took this journey as a family to do one big green thing every year, is if you think of the door as a step back into the real world, that if everybody here went out that door tonight and took one of those major 6 actions as a result of being here at the launch of an Academy for Sustainable Futures today, there already would be some substantial change. So my vision of the future is that we don't have incremental change where we seek to do things, we qualify, we just commit, because we can't say that the science has not given us a message. And every single day of my life, I tweet scientists and I retweet scientists that are just demonstrating the difference in temperatures in my lifetime. So I want to be on the right side of this when my grandchildren ask me what I've done. I want to be able to look them in the proverbial eye. So I think as a future, you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't care. So is there any more you can do in your caring? That's what I like people to do. I think that what was really helpful in getting lots of staff on board was that we were not a research-led university. So we were not constrained by those elements, but we are a university that does a lot of applied research. And there are a lot of people who are researching in areas linked to sustainability. One of the things that, I don't know whether you've done it here, Peter, have you done a staff audit on sustainability skills? But the first thing I did when I went was a staff audit of sustainability skills. And that gave me my army. My God, did they come out, because all sorts of people I didn't even know about, when they were asked about whether they wanted the university to go down this route, they were really supportive. 70% of the staff were really supportive. And a lot of them were saying that the university said one thing and did another. And they really wanted to contribute towards the university saying and doing sort of thing. So I think those sorts of information, that kind of data is really important on the journey. So it's real outcomes. And also then the staff feel more engaged in the project as well. And certainly we can share the work that was done. It was done independently by a researcher who had come out of the Sustainable Development Commission. So it was good quality work that was put into that. And a lot of us as universities have some materials we can share like that, don't we, Peter? Those of us who've been on this journey. Well, I think there are some things, in a sense, the story of Wales is how when a government decides to take that decision and gets other party political support, so it goes into legislation, then actually it changes the parameters through which decisions are made. And that's the really exciting thing about it. And that's why on this last slide, the fact that we've got other countries now doing the same thing. And I think with the UN requiring countries to report, we will see some big institutional changes because countries have signed up to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And that's now only 8 years away. And so for many countries, that feels like a kind of parameter they can start putting plans in place for delivery. And the UN thinks the model that Wales has accidentally developed is really helpful here. But I think it's also about unfortunately, it's still countercultural. So often the first question journalists ask me is, when did you last fly? Do you see what I mean? And that's the first sentence they want to write about me. Now, I'm on pretty good ground here because I have the last time I flew personally was back in 2009, I think, sort of thing. And I've flown twice for work since then. But I teach in Harvard, so I agree with Harvard that I will go physically to Harvard once every 8 years or so. And so you have to, but you have to be kind of cleaner than clean in this when you're arguing the case, quite often, unfortunately, because a lot of people want to still believe they can carry on with business as usual, that they can just jump on a flight and go to New York for the weekend, and that is fine, sort of thing. So I think but there's also, what pressure can you put on the big corporates? There's a lot of work going on at the moment, particularly for financial institutions, to change what they call the fiduciary duty, which at the moment is getting the best outcomes for the shareholders, to actually make sure that those best outcomes will fit with legislation on climate change. And there's a lot of approaches along those lines now. That would be absolutely game-changing because it would mean you could not spend money on something that was contributing towards the problem. So these are the kind of things you can campaign for as well. There's a lot to campaign for in this. I think it would be fair to say that there is substantial conflict between what is going on in Wales, what is going on in Scotland, and the current UK government. There's a very different kind of alignment about what matters. I think that the definition of safety and the role of government in keeping people safe in Scotland and Wales, you'll have seen through COVID, was very much about how to protect their populations, listening to the science. So a very different sort of agenda to the one that played out here. And I think that that's the kind of thing that you see as part of the identity and culture of countries, and that therefore any legislation that changes the paradigm has to also understand the identity and culture. And I think for Wales in particular, part of that identity and culture is the feeling that people abstracted money, copper, iron, steel, quarried stone, and left the Welsh population unhealthier, poorer as a result. And the UK has been partly built on that extraction. So I think that that actually has been a long grievance that means that people are much more focused on family and community. And that is very much the way. And we've tested it 3 times, by the way. When I was in government, we tested, these ideas originally came from the population about, what do you want to live in? A safe and viable, well-connected community. And then that was tested again and again through the process of the legislation. And people really like it as a concept. Love is low carbon. I think in a sense that obviously humans are part of nature. I mean, I say obviously, it's not obvious to some people who feel that humans are separate from nature, but humans are part of nature, and we rely on nature to sustain us. Which means if we think about what are those elements that enables humans to sustain themselves most effectively, and that means that we have to consider giving more rights to nature to protect nature against the avarice of humans. And some countries have very much gone down that path in terms of giving rights to specific parts of nature, for example, a river or a sacred place or Mother Earth, etc. And others are looking at now the proposal for the international crime of ecocide, when humans damage nature and what the reparation should be. But I think from my personal point of view, it's that unless we see nature as the thing that underpins what we do, then actually we won't have that underpinning in the future. And that's why we need to ensure that nature has rights to be recognised and regulated in the context, in the way that we do with other areas of work. And it's quite a difficult debate, because many people who work in government find the notion of rights in nature something far too left field in terms of contemplating. But I think that if you just look at, for example, all the work that has gone on in the last few months, commissioned by the UK government, for example, in terms of the role of nature and the valuing of nature, that starts to look at an agenda where governments might feel more comfortable in recognising natural capital in terms of the way they make decisions. Oh, I've been on ity iteration of the Swansea Bay Tidal project. We will get it, I'm determined, in due course. But yes, I mean, I think the big issue for the UK is how to both have a lot of renewable energy and baseload energy as well, for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And so there's always going to be big discussions about what that baseload can look like. And Tidal has to be part of that mix. I mean, it's as regular as anything we could possibly anticipate in any other field. So yes, the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon is currently going through a process inside the Welsh Government where there have been a number of bids effectively to be the first big marine energy location. And so I think that by the end of this year, we will have one, if not two, proposals in terms of taking that forward. But the one that's been most researched in planning terms has been Swansea Bay. And the application would be for the whole UK. You know, for those of us who've been involved in it, always saw this as something that would generate 5 or 6 lagoons or something equivalent across the whole of the UK, so that you got energy from them in different points in different locations, different times. The specific issue, which is concerned a lot of people, is if you look at talking about seaspiracy and some of the films that have just demonstrated how the life in the sea is being decimated every single day of our lives. And we've seen some awful situations recently where we've seen mass deaths on individual days. We saw one in Whitby a couple of weeks ago. The real concern is what will be the effect on fish of those turbines. But I chaired a report on the Hinkley Power Station, which is trying to ask the planning commissioners to allow it to carry on putting water of increased temperature into the River Severn without having an acoustic fish deterrent that has the potential to kill millions of fish. So the big issue is that we can't trade off one against another, because that's what's always happened, is that governments have decided this is more important than that. Both are important. So it's how we can get the right balance. And that might mean new technology, that might mean changing the technology in use in projects, but it has to be about the two together. So you're absolutely right, there are some environmentalists who are concerned particularly around fish mortality in the context of the tidal lagoon. But there are also many people who think that's entirely manageable by the way in which the technology will be used. So it's both those issues, and thank you for bringing that up. Oh, do you know, that's what we all do, really. I mean, I didn't, you know, when I came here today and your Vice-Chancellor, you know, said it's been amazing, your legislation, it's world-beating. And I was thinking, but we only got it because I was cross. Because I was fed up that I was a minister. And, you know, I don't know whether anybody's seen a programme called Yes Minister that we used to be on for years and years ago. And the basic premise of Yes Minister is that the civil servant says Yes Minister and basically stops the minister from doing what they want to do all the time. And I used to feel that that's what was happening to me. You know, I'd think this was a really good, and I was only carrying out what I'd been asked to do in my job. And I would not, and I'd really struggle to do it because somebody would stop me doing it. And so it was only really because I thought, I've got to do this another way. So 2 pieces of advice. If you feel in your gut it's right to do it. And don't take no for an answer, which means don't ask for permission. And I just found that, because I started life as a teacher, but when I was a teacher, I was doing similar things. I mean, I remember a class of school leavers, and Burnham Wood came to Dunsinane. It's a quote from Macbeth. But actually, it was we went out and used the school hedge, which had been cut. I took the whole class out so that we could use the cuttings from the hedge to demonstrate Burnham Wood coming to Dunsinane in the play of Macbeth. And years later, bumped into somebody who said, "Oh, it's the best lesson I've ever had." So I think it's, you know, I use nature in everything I do. And actually that creates all sorts of other opportunities. So I'm not special. I have kind of like realised that there are some things you can do, and partly it's about the opportunity and seizing the opportunity. Now, I think that there are going to be a lot of people thinking about gas at the moment, because gas is going to be held by other countries. So what are the quickest and best ways to come off that. We've been talking about it for 20 years. We should have been leading the world in the context of renewable energy. We're not, but we could be, because we've got all the opportunities to do so. So suddenly there is an opportunity that you wasn't there even as little as 2 months ago. You couldn't get people to talk about it. And maybe if we're going to try and get good things out of this, we can actually start saying, well, let's do that, because that actually helps future generations as well. And it stops the potential for further wars over fossil fuels. So just go for it. I think that, do you know, one of the things that when I first went to do some teaching in Harvard, I was introduced to what they called the Harvard Squiggle. And the Harvard Squiggle is, I'm a minister. I say, I decided this here, and it happened here. And it makes it sound like a straight line. Whereas, in fact, what really happens is you start here, nobody supports you. Nobody wants to play, or the key person leaves, or suddenly there's not enough money for what you want to do because that money's going to go elsewhere. And so all these things go, basically they plummet to the bottom. And then somebody new turns up, or a grant appears, and you've still got this idea ready to go. And then you do it. And so I think the thing is you don't get disheartened, because this is too important to fail. I mean, everybody who's spoken today has basically said the reality is really grim unless we act. And our activism is the thing that gives us hope. So stubborn optimism is the way to deal, I think, with everything. And the things I'd do differently, I'd probably have left earlier. Because I find that when I make all this stormy stuff in every job I do, when I leave, it happens. So I think I just need to keep leaving. And then all the people behind me who were really, really interested, actually really rise up and go for it. So on that note, rise up and go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Jane, and thank you to the audience. Now it's time to close what I think has been a remarkable evening, certainly one I've been waiting for a very long time to have. So thank you. I think just to close off, we've heard how One Nation and Jane has responded to the need to protect the future, the well-being of future generations. We've heard about the importance of the individual, collective, and systemic change. And if we are to rise to the challenge of the importance of authentic collaborative partnerships. We've heard from students about sustainability, education, and hope for the future, and the collective voice of the Students' Union in no uncertain terms. We've heard how the university is responding through the launch of the Academy, the Climate Emergency Strategy, and through the new strategic framework in order to make significant and meaningful contributions. And we've signalled the commitment to develop our own pledge to future generations. However, these are still just words. Over the last 12 years, we've had some success with embedding sustainability in research, education, and operations. We've changed policy, we've made significant carbon reductions. When I wrote the application for our national and international Green Gown Awards, I entitled it From Start to Beginning to Make a Difference. So, slow but steady progress. The last 2 years has diverted us from that steady progress, and it is now clearer than ever that it's time to act big, to move further and faster, and to act with compassion and courage to change the things that we can, to leave behind unsustainable behaviours, systems and processes, and contribute meaningfully to a sustainable future for us all. Thank you.